it factor? Well, 20 years ago, sir, it was like there was an it factor against being gay. And nowadays, there's not a problem with being gay. So the thing we can take from this is, like, we shouldn't actually follow any it factor. We shouldn't give any precedence or any weighting to the fact that there is some it factor. We should, in fact, look at the issue rationally, and we should see what each party can take from this issue. So, the rational issues in tonight's debate were really the idea of abuse and consent. Firstly, can there be any real consent in a situation where there is incest? And secondly, even if there is consent, is it okay to bring a disabled child into the world? Is it okay to bring a child into the world who may or may not be socially isolated? So let me deal with these 2 points. First of all, consent. We heard from the foolish negative team that the family structure is different somehow to other relationships because, trust is built over time while brother and sister, for example, are growing up together. This is absolutely ridiculous. Like, basically in any long-term relationship where, say, 2 loving people grow to love one another, we can say that there is this intimate family-type relationship. We don't think the fact that people have grown up together or that people are close to each other is any good reason to stop them from having a relationship with each other. The other reason we heard about why there could be no real consent was because apparently, just because 2 people are related, this means that they have no recourse for help when the relationship goes wrong. Sorry, negative team, not a reason. In fact, lots of people in relationships, in normal relationships, well actually no, we won't call them normal relationships because hey, incest can be normal too. Lots of people in any type of relationship also don't have other people who they can turn to. Like, under this logic, the negative team would say anyone who has no help outside the relationship cannot get married, cannot have sex. Well, negative team, do you stand against marriage? Because we don't. So where do we draw the line for consent? Where should people be able to consent to when they can have sex with one another? Well, you know what the great thing about this debate is? We already have a test for this, and the test that we brought you on the affirmative team is that existing rape laws and existing laws relating to consent can suffice. Because in fact, we can apply existing laws relating to consent to these incestuous relationships on a one-on-one basis. If we find that a father has been dominating his daughter, we can apply existing laws to make that illegal. And if we see that instead that there is a loving, normal relationship, then we can apply the existing rape laws to say this relationship is okay. This is something that society accepts. So, what I've got written on my paper here is disabled people and social isolation. So to phrase it a bit more politically correctly, what we heard from the negative team was that basically we don't want to bring people into the world who we know have a high chance of genetic defects. Because, of course, on the affirmative team, we have to admit that there is a high chance of genetic defects where you have incest. But what we say here is that under the status quo, ignoring incest, we don't stop people from having kids just on the basis of disability. Say 2 people with Down syndrome fall in love and want to have kids. We allow that under the status quo, even though we know that the chance of the child having Down syndrome too is in the range of 90%. The government doesn't intervene here, and why? Because we know that it's not the role of the government to intervene in individual relationships, even where this does have a high chance of genetic defects. And then the social isolation point raised quickly by Monique at the end of her speech, basically the argument would run somewhere like this. People don't like gay people in Texas, therefore we should ban gays in Texas. Basically, the problem with her argument is she's letting policy be dictated by a bigoted minority, or perhaps majority in this case. And we don't think that our policy should be dictated by bigots. Just because other people don't like children of incest, it doesn't mean that we don't love them.
Well, Mr. Speaker, I'm going to carry on Nick's thread of performing some sort of didactic role, maybe narrating my speech with a little bit of advice for that side of the house and for you in general as you continue your beautiful careers in the debating world. Never have I found it easier in the debating world, and this isn't going to be an easy feat for any of you either, to be a prude in this debate. They thought they could cry love, they thought they could cry liberty, and they would get away with the half-assed arguments they've given us. They have to draw, and this is the first lesson of my speech. When you make an analogy like being gay, or me saying having a wildly sexual relationship with Chris's mother, for example, you have to draw that analogy to the type of relationship we're actually talking about in this debate and show me why they're similar. The characterization that we're actually dealing with is what we've told you on the negative team. That is, when you, as a sister or a brother, someone you've grown up with your entire life and learned to trust, who has often performed a caretaker role for you, turns to you and says, let's have a sexual relationship. Do you have the capacity to not consent to that? To look that person in the eye and say, no thank you, I think I'll leave our family now? Probably not. And then further down the line, when you do enter into that relationship, having diminished that capacity to consent, whether you can remove yourself from that relationship, the state is there to protect vulnerable people, Mr. Speaker, not to entrench a structural likelihood where they're going to get hurt time and time again. But I'll go into that in great detail in my speech. I'm going to talk about, firstly, consent. Secondly, I'm going to talk about the state and intimate relationships and the ick factor, which is another example of where the affirmative puts words into the negative's mouth and then rebuts that, as opposed to the things we've said. So firstly, the issue of consent. So they told us this type of relationship is like every other relationship you've entered in the realm of your consciousness. So all the flirting that's going on between the affirmative team and their like milk bar ladies is somehow similar to you and your brother, you and your mum. And the only justification for why that wasn't the case in this situation was that you're over 18 when you enter into that relationship. I've already talked about elaborately in my introduction about why this is someone you confide in, is your caretaker, and that trust exists only unto those people within your family. But there's something that they didn't deign to respond to until the third speaker, Mr. Speaker, was the networks that you build and that you sacrifice when you necessarily enter into an incestuous relationship. Until Nick. And he told us that some people have no friends either, so we don't not allow them to enter into a relationship. Right, but what is the role of the state? And this is the question you have to ask in every debate. Is it to encourage a situation which is likely to hurt people, or is it to protect the people within that situation? We think it's the latter, and we stand on that side of the house. Let's deal with the other analogies in this debate. They told us that the minority fetish of being gay was somehow similar to an incestuous relationship. No, you can establish consent in a gay relationship because most people, whether you choose to be bisexual or gay, or whether you don't choose to be, can have the capacity to consent because there's not that existing trust relationship available for exploitation. What's a different analogy which we gave to you? Bestiality. And they dictated to us the norms of the canberra society as someone who we should look to for our cultural progressive. Right? But more importantly, there are more analogies we can draw upon, like child porn, for example. There are instances where people derive their sexual satisfaction, and maybe in some instances we should allow them to have that sexual satisfaction, but not when it impinges on the right of another human being or another animal on our side of the house. Then they told us, well, there are long-term relationships where you build a similar sort of trust. Right, the state doesn't prohibit you into entering that long-term relationship if both of you are not from the same family. But this is a different situation where the entry into that relationship is what the state has to protect you from. Then we go on to medical problems, and this was the exchanges about disabilities. Obviously, Mr. Speaker, you wouldn't want to condemn someone to a life where their quality of life is automatically diminished at that point of birth, and that's something that we stand firmly on the negative side of the house. We're all for providing services for those people to encourage that if that is their unlikely or unhappy fate. But that doesn't mean the state funds that ability or that the state legalizes that ability. That's why we don't fund IVF, and that's why they didn't engage with on this side of the house. Mr. Speaker, all of you will find that the debating community is an extraordinarily incestuous one. You're probably all going to hook up with each other at some point in the next year. That's not a reason to support this motion. We quite happily stand in opposition.
Baby steps, and all speakers feel free to take part in their motivation tonight. Alright, begin a thinly veiled plan for you guys to make friends. I want you all to turn to the person next to you. If you know the person next to you, turn to the other person to the other side. And have like a 5-minute chat. Have like a 1-minute chat about what you learned today. Come up with something insightful to say, and we'll hear back from you guys in a minute.
favour.
Yeah, we debate much more fun things than you. Sorry, much more fun things. Yeah. Anything else? Go.
It's like talk and non-stop, like non-stop talk.
We debate here, yeah. Yeah, definitely. Go.
We're not allowed palm cards.
Right, yeah. Everyone uses paper instead of palm cards. It's really great. You see, like usually behind a table, and you get your own timer as well, so you can practice your own speech. That's really fun. Also, you know what to
Both teams started culturally humiliating each other.
Yeah, we're all friends here. So we don't know the other team, and maybe don't try that. Go.
I noticed that there was a lot more swearing. Is that allowed?
Yes. Anything else? Also, maybe not. Judge your audience.
They might have just been because they were shorter speeches, but I noticed there weren't any splits. Like team splits.
Alright, okay. There were team splits, maybe there were, more subtle, there weren't quite so that maybe your own speeches when you start getting the dog spot and everything, try and make your team split as obvious as possible. If people can't catch them, that's a problem.
I think maybe what you also, because you missed it, because it's shorter, because you generally, as a tactic, don't give the split of your second speaker if your first speaker, because you don't want the other team to know what your second speaker is going to say and have 16 minutes to prepare a rebuttal for it. Right? So you just give your own split.
Yeah, tactics.
What's a split?
It's when you tell the audience what you'll be speaking about in your debate. So I'll talk about this and this.
Because you split it up.
Because you split it up. Go. Sorry again? No, but if it's in response to playback, generally you don't have new arguments coming out yet. So yeah, that's the rule. Don't do that. Go.
Question.
Yes.
Are you allowed to drink while debating?
Drink what?
Like,
Sorry, it's a real question.
yeah, like drink alcohol.
Oh, not in your show. You like hot classes, so I'm going to go with no. Water's fine. Alright, awesome. Does anyone have anything to say about the actual features? Really good? Something people love, one great. Where's the photo back? Right, who do you think won? Hands up for affirmative team. Actually, no, clap for affirmative team. Negative team is clapping, good. Negative team. We're all winners here. Awesome, thank you so much for listening. I hope you're all excited to do debates of your own next week.
I thank Rashada for organising all that. It was actually, coming up with the topics and being able to get everyone here on time and making sure that debate ran really smoothly. I think Rashada did a really good job. Some of the things we forgot to mention earlier are apparently there's been a shortage with some of the registration forms for the novice competition. So I think Beck's got some sort of system that she can now explain.
Yes, a couple of people have asked me, we have run out of forms. That's not a problem. What you should do is come down to the front and we have pieces of paper here which are not forms. You can still write on them. Basically, the information you need is your name, your email. If there's anyone you want to debate with, you can just write their name as well. And yeah, it doesn't really matter. I don't know if Michelle said this, I will just use this. But just in case, we would prefer you to have 5 members of the team if you know that many people. If you don't know that many people in favors, we'll still put you in the team. If you like that many people, then there'll be someone you want to come on.
There's absolutely no pressure to put down anyone's name though. It's like when I came here in first year, I didn't know anyone else in the society at all. That's the reason that we're sort of able to put a team together. So if you're no pressure to put down anyone's name, if you don't know anyone, that's cool. That's what we're here for. Yeah. Also, Penelope has arrived, our social officer. The aforementioned one. So yeah, cheer her on. Why not?